Hello, Mike Kako. Nice to see you all again. I didn't know about the first time coming up to speak, so that was a little bit of a surprise. My presentation now is not a surprise. I did tell Alika that in my last presentation, I didn't get a chance to thank so many people that make wonderful things like this consortium happen. So I told him I was going to not present and I was just going to spend the time thanking all of my friends. And he said, no, don't do that because you'll run out of time. But I do want to I do want to continue the thanking people. I wanted to thank Representative Jackson Sayama for taking charge and setting this up. I also want to thank Evelyn He, his office manager, incredible personnel, and to make this event happen. All of the people in the back who made all of the filming and the Zoom and the presentations possible, mahalo nui. Scott Glenn, you weren't here earlier to hear me thank you, but thank you so much. I'll never forget that evening. It was a lot of fun. We did kind of bombard your evening. I'm so glad we did. So with that being said, I'm ready to begin my presentation. Sydney, how does it work? Do I use this thing here? Okay. All right. So earlier I briefly talked about the consortium, and we talked about all the members of the consortium. Here they are. It's a collection of for-profits, nonprofits, innovators, business leaders, community servants, and it's really built around servitude and giving back to our community. And we figured if we're doing all these things naturally in a space of aloha, then it'd be very easy for us to work together to start tackling something like carbon recovery, carbon capture, storing it, and of course, utilization. So at that moment, in the spirit of that, we created the CCSU Consortium. Carbon capture, storage, utilization. So my company, Dibs Hawaii, we're a native Hawaiian company. We were established in 2009. We've been doing dry ice cleaning for the state of Hawaii for the last 13 years. When we initially started this project, when we started this company, we wanted to be able to clean, providing an effective level of clean, accolade level of clean, without doing any secondary waste stream. So I took a carbon neutral standpoint at the time. We weren't having a discussion around net zero. We weren't talking about carbon negative. Just being neutral was something that was worth getting after. So we started from there. I want to share that in this presentation, it's going to be really fresh. There's going to be lots of pictures. I like to present from a 5th grade mindset because I think children seem to get it right away. And when given in that place, children also like to share. And so you'll see a lot. I think the collection of all the discussions today really comes around this key component right here, shared learning. And we have a name for that, and it's called Iki Alapono. And you'll see along the way from all of the slides of my consortium partners, you'll start to see Iki Alapono, Iki Alapono. And what that's doing is it's the bridge that connects all of us, the shared learning, the trade school, the nonprofits, the pipeline, going back to the schools, teaching the kids STEM. So lots of shared learning happening. We can't do it if we can't share. When we're sharing, we feel comfortable. When we're comfortable, we're confident. And most importantly, we're safe. And we want to be able to do that and show that to the children. That way, these platforms will be there for them. We talked about the bill earlier, so I'm not going to go through this. We thanked everybody earlier, so I'll just keep going. So my talking point is going to be carbon smart commodities. And what I learned from shared learning earlier with Vietnam was that they had a different term for it. It was called climate smart commodities. But yet they're the same. So here we are, so different in our viewpoints and our perspectives from one of science and technology to community. But yet, here we are, very much alike in our understanding around something and our objectives to move forward. So for me, when I look at carbon smart commodities, because my company, Dibs Hawaii, which stands just the military acronym for Dry Ice Blasting Service. So if you ever see, we got dibs on it. We got dibs on CO2 now. That's what we're working on, right? That does stand for dry ice blasting. And so because that's the nature of our business, of course that's a commodity, right? Without this without this incredible gas, carbon dioxide, which is being vilified, that it's just so horrible. It's just the perspective and the lens of it. And that when we look at it from a lens, from a commodity standpoint, we can really start to change, shape, and revision and reposition ourselves to do better practices. I think that's the key piece of what I want you to walk away from is we're pivoting to better practices. So that's dry ice right there. If you've never saw it in that form, that's 3 millimeter high density dry ice. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of background around CO2. If you don't have it, it might make this presentation a little bit easier. It is the only gas that can exist in 3 phases at the same time. Right now, as I'm speaking, I'm exhaling carbon dioxide. This room is being filled with carbon dioxide through conversation, and we're completely okay with that. Another form of CO2 that we see is in our soda, our soft drinks. When I was up there having lunch, I was talking to Doug Adams, and I said, hey, take a look at this. Here you got some CO2 right here. And we get that. And if that soda was flat, we wouldn't drink it. So it changes the way we view it. So that's in the vapor state. We store it in the liquid state. So when you take it, you compress it, you store it under pressure, and it's a liquid. Okay? When we make the dry ice, it's a solid state. So you're taking that liquid, and when that liquid meets the atmosphere again, it starts to react incredibly quickly. At this point, it's pushed through a pelletizer, a die, and what you see is spaghetti coming out. This spaghetti that you see right here is negative 111 degrees Fahrenheit. Negative 111 degrees Fahrenheit. Imagine the thermal capacity in that. The amount of fossil fuels and energy to get something that cold. Incredible. This naturally stays in this state until it expires or sublimates. So CO2 is incredible that it's the only gas that can exist in 3 phases at the same time, which we call supercritical CO2. At which point, you learned a lot about that, Scott, from CarbFix, because they take the supercritical CO2 and they use that to inject it to bind into the limestone and turn into basically limestone and be stored away forever. So that's a little background about CO2. You have a little bit of understanding when we go into other presentations and where we come from when we say carbon smart commodities. So I kind of like this slide because it's challenging what we're looking at here in Hawaii and other places. So originally I had this, it was all animated, so you see things come in and we could play, we can ask questions. But import substitution is the greatest means for us to offset our carbon footprint. We import everything. 95% of what comes into Hawaii comes on a container, comes on a tractor trailer. The wheels are made of fossil fuels, made out of oil, petrochemicals. So everything part of the component to receiving our imports is connected to fossil fuels. So import substitution should be the hallmark of what we can do in Hawaii from a responsible standpoint. Okay? So if we look at that, well, that's my carbon footprint over there. Okay, well, what does net zero mean? We're going to hear a talking point about that. Well, what are these carbon credits? What are these carbon credits that are happening? If I focus on import substitution, if I pay attention to my carbon footprint, if I go towards net zero practices, how do I get a carbon credit for that? How does the state of Hawaii, in its effort to decarbonize and move to these models, how do we apply for a carbon credit as a state? These are great questions, and I hope you guys walk away asking this. How do we participate? Of course, carbon sequestration. I put that in black because this is something that is happening here already, and I think that it's worth paying attention to. And that's our native Hawaiian forest. That's the Ko'olau mountain range. That's the Waianae mountain range. And if you wake up in the morning and you see those clouds getting sucked into that mountain range, there's a reason for that. The reason why all that moisture is coming to that place is because there's carbon in the soil, because it's untouched, and because of that ancient practice of storing away our biomass and having it compost and carbon in the ground. We're seeing that attraction of the carbon in the air like a magnet get pulled into it. So I put that in black because carbon sequestration is happening here already. It's a different lens, and we've lost sight of that. That goes back to agriculture. So when we start focusing on agriculture, healthy soil systems, developing in that, biochar, some of the topics we're going to talk about, we can start to increase the carbon in our soil, start changing our landscape around food, and ultimately address food and energy resilience while we're doing with carbon smart commodities. So this is kind of a fun slide, my favorite slide actually out of my whole presentation. Okay, so food and energy resilience, I think that's the theme of what we have. I did take these pictures, so I think if my presentation isn't very good, at least my photography skills were not half bad. I have the picture of the volcano because there's a lot of CO2 being emitted from that. And to Scott, to your point, if we're at a point where we can start to do direct air capture in a place where we have energy like that, what an excellent landscape for us to start pulling CO2 from out of the air. So I want to go back and address that. I did this slide for you because when we had that discussion talking point, you're absolutely correct. We need to also at the same time focus on what we can do to pull CO2 out of the air. And I think by doing carbon negative fuels, we can get there a lot quicker. Next to it, we have the plants. The plants are actually the means, the mechanism to pull the CO2. So I want to take this back to a 5th grade level, and we want to be a lot like the plant. We want to be flexible. We want to be able to absorb. Our farmers are going to talk a lot about that, but that's why we're focusing. That's why we gave so much praise to our farmers, because they're on the forefront of carbon sequestration and carbon smart commodities. So what you see here is kind of my neck of the woods. This is really how I view the problem, and I have it really broken down pretty simply. In order for us to capture carbon, we have to have a tank to do so. So whoever owns the tank owns the opportunity. And Hawaii has plenty of containers. Everything comes in a container. What we don't have a lot of containers of are specialty tanks that have the ability to store carbon dioxide, this incredible gas in this phase. And so without that, we don't have the means to recover it because we have nowhere to store it. And if we don't have anywhere to store it, how do we transport it? So we focused on the basic principles here. So here we have the smokestack. Below that, you have a wet scrubber. Okay, so it's going to get pulled in, it's going to get clean, it's going to get scrubbed. You have 100-ton CO2 tank storage. So now that we cleaned it, we scrubbed it, we need to store it. Once we store it, how do we get it to our other locations? How do we get it to other destinations that CO2 is a complete luxury item? And I want to be clear when I say this, CO2 in the state of Hawaii, liquid CO2, is a complete luxury item. When was the last time anybody in this room, show of hands, was able to go to the store and buy dry ice? Put your hands up. I want to see. Anybody in this room buy dry ice in the last week? For ice cream? How many of you had ice cream at the beach or popsicles in your cooler for your kids on a hot day? How many of you have been at the beach and ate ice cream from your own cooler? Anybody? Mikey's probably the only guy who can, because he takes dry ice from the job site and then they go freeze ice cream at their football games and whatnot. And everybody goes, "Where'd you do that?" He's just being modest because he's the only guy in here who could say that. But that's affecting Hawaiian lifestyle. That changes, that simple approach, that availability. It's a luxury item. What does that mean when it comes to disaster preparedness, emergency response, storms? What happens when the lights go out? What's the first thing that we're thinking of? We're thinking about saving our food, our perishables. We hook up our generators, and the first thing we plug into is our refrigerators. So there's incredible aspects around this carbon smart commodity that we very well know well, but we don't have access to it. So the big first piece of why we want to do this consortium is we want to address Hawaiian lifestyle. We want to benefit the community. We want to be able, so somebody from Hanamaui can go and get dry ice. They can go out to Costco, can do the long drive, but they can stay longer. They can get more business done. They can visit with more of their family members because they have a full understanding that the food and the energy that they spent to get those resources won't perish on the way back. That also impacts import substitution and our carbon footprint. So we got our tank that stores the CO2 that we scrub. We got our liquid CO2 ISO container that's carrying food grade CO2. And if we're dealing with agriculture, we better have food grade CO2, right? It's our food. What we have next is a balloon, and we have a recovery system. This is the technology that I'm really into. So if we're going to be making dry ice, it takes 2.5 pounds of liquid CO2 to make 1 pound of dry ice, okay? That's very, very ineffective, very inefficient. So if we put it through that little machine on the right-hand side, that's a CO2 recovery system. It's really small. So as we're pelletizing the CO2 and making that, we recover the CO2. You see that balloon right above it? So we take that CO2 vapor, it's stored there. We then go back to the step we have there. This system on the bottom right takes that vapor and it reliquefies it so we can put it back into the tank. We don't have to scrub it because it's already food grade CO2. So by doing that practice, we take the conversion ratio from 2.5 to 1 to 1.3 to 1. That's incredible, the amount of savings. Imagine the fuel savings and the import substitution of not burning fossil fuels to have all that tonnage of waste now repurposed. So we're doing this in our practice as we introduce CO2 dry ice into a market where it's a complete luxury item. So I think that was the challenge for us. How do we introduce this carbon smart commodity in such a way that we are being cognizant of our footprint, where our fuel comes from, the amount of energy that's required to make that process? So that's what CCSU really is. If you guys are wondering, okay, now I got a picture of it, I can see it. So carbon dioxide utilization, well, we talked about dry ice. That's dry ice. That's my hand. That was made in Pearl Harbor. We had that constructed back in 2016. So we were really pushing the envelope back then so that we could do things like support Red Hill, decontaminate. However, we can't clean with CO2 if we don't have CO2 to clean. Much like how Coke and Pepsi, you don't have a great soda if you don't have CO2 in it. So very important that we establish this third-party CO2 infrastructure and create a virtual terminal. That is utilization. So what really inspired me, and this about to continue this work with the ag, is this statement right here. And this is why I get so excited talking to kids, because we start talking from an engineer perspective and it gets really complicated, but the kids really got it best. And when they stated that the plants are really the ones who are providing this effort. And really at the end of the day, when it's raining CO2. And that's why the plants grow. That's why it's so successful. And that's why Mount Kaala and the Ko'olaus are thriving and the clouds are there, because of this statement right here. So it's a very, very beautiful thing. And so we have to do this work. We have to do this work, like Representative Lisa Martin said, for the future. She's very excited about that. So we talked about this, the third-party CO2 infrastructure. Just here were some of the things. SAF stands for Sustainable Aviation Fuel. I think that's very important in our effort to decarbonize. Soil revitalization, cold chain logistics, we touched upon that. Concrete mineralization, Representative Lisa Martin touched upon that. Cleaning and inspections, that's the dry ice business that we do. Environmental response, that would be like Red Hill, for example, being able to decontaminate without having to take the waste stream, without any secondary waste stream, and then have to use the fuel to dispose of that waste stream. Disaster preparedness, and then of course we touched upon Hawaiian lifestyle. And ultimately I put dibs at the bottom is because Hawaii wants to be able to say they have dibs on their own CO2. I think that's the goal that we want to have. We want to be able to say, hey, that's mine, I captured it, it's ours, take a look at it, how exciting. So we have technology partners that allow us to do this. I didn't invent it, I don't have any patents that say that we can do this. We have just great manufacturers who've been doing this work for a long time, and we want to be able to use those relationships and use those tools to advance our cause. And so this is what dry ice looks like in all its different phases. That is pure CO2, by the way, on the left-hand side. In all of its phases, you got blocks, you got slices, you got dust, you got a 3-millimeter high-density pellet. What you have on the right is what's so exciting, and that's the mobile dry ice production hub that CoalJet designed. It was inspired by the work that we did here in Pearl Harbor to make a remote location dry ice capacity. Now we have the ability to deploy dry ice via a container. What we're really good at, we can move containers anywhere. Now I can put one of these at port, I can put it at a power plant, put a CO2 tank, which you just saw. So you take a 20-foot container, take another container, that's a 40-foot container, you got another 10 feet for your tools, and now here we are, dry ice blasting, decarbonizing a process, cleaning without secondary waste stream. Being able to bring dry ice to an environment, to Molokai, to a place where hunters can go and hunt and they can package their dry ice. The fishermen in Big Island can go and flash freeze their fish and send it off to other locations. Yeah, very exciting. Representative Lisa Martin talked about carbon smart concrete. This was a project that the state of Hawaii was running. That is Kapolei. And I think it's incredible that we were the tip of the spear in doing this effort. I do want to make mention that in our ability to do this application and continue to do this application, we have to have a steady stream of CO2 to do so. That means that you can't start a project if you don't have enough CO2 to fulfill the project all the way to its end. It's like a drink. You don't change the mixture. Okay? So once you start pouring this process, every pour has to be the same. You can't have CO2 one day and not have CO2 the next day. So if we're really going to hit these goals, we have to have the CO2 dedicated for those purposes. Okay? It's very important. So I want to be able to make sure that collectively, doesn't matter what island we're on, if we're pouring concrete over there, is there CO2 available to them to do these projects consistently? That's very important. And we'll slowly walk through that process. But this is very important. And how wonderful to see our CO2 sequestration in our visible infrastructure. So we might not be injecting it into the ground, but understand that we're injecting it into our infrastructure, Scott. So I think that this is where we get to meet in the middle of the road, where Hawaii might not be bearing it in geological structures, but we can be storing it forever in our infrastructure. So I think that's a remarkable compromise. This just goes on to talk about, Lisa Martin mentioned this, concrete mineralization, pretty straightforward. I'll give you a couple seconds to read it. That is sequestration and utilization in the same statement. I want to be clear about that. Sequestration and utilization in the same statement. This is really what Dibs Hawaii does best. This is what we've been doing for the military, and that's decarbonizing industrial cleaning. So the Navy has a requirement that states that we have to use CO2 to clean ventilation systems, kitchens, galleys, and the reason for that is because it sanitizes, it's clean, there's no secondary waste stream, and it has a great ability to cut through grease because it's so cold. So next couple pieces are all going to be really about dry splasting. It is the nature of my business. I want people to be a little bit familiar with it. I just want to show you some before and afters and really just give you kinds of a taste of what utilization looks like in regards to our business model. There's going to be some excellent presentations on agriculture and hemp, and we'll let them do that. But I just wanted to give you a quick glimpse of some of the work we've done, the impacts of the work we've done, and what carbon dioxide utilization looks like from Dibs Hawaii. I like this picture right over here because it says a lot in this picture. When I look at it, the first thing I think of is safety. The second thing I look of is cleanliness. And then the third thing that I see over here is an opportunity. This picture is from Puna Geothermal Plant. It was under 150 days of acid rain when the lava flow took it over. They basically walked away from the plant, and were able to come back after 150, 60 days. We came back, we left Waianae, Hawaii, and we flew over there. We shipped all of our gear on a barge, and we took it into the lava field. We off-roaded into the lava field. There wasn't any power. We brought in our own power, our own generators, our own systems, and 3 of us lived there for 3 months in that area, and we cleaned every electrical contact point of corrosion so they could go back online. It was a wonderful project. And this was the first day when we started. We didn't know where to begin. So we just said, I said, well, let's make it clean to start. How about we just start with a really clean job site? And we went from there. And it was a wonderful journey, and we had a great time doing it. This was supposed to be animated, and each one came in. It was supposed to be a lot more fun. Sorry, it's not that much fun. Okay, so here's some before and afters. This is actually a ventilation on top of a surface craft. I don't get to share a lot of the pictures of the works that we do because we're in military installations and they don't really want us to take a look at it. But you can take a look at this. It's fine. So on the left-hand side, this is where your air goes through. You can see it's disgusting. It's gross. They never clean it. About 30 seconds to a minute, that's what's on the right-hand side. That's the effects of using dry ice effectively to clean. No secondary waste stream, and we sanitized. 30 seconds to a minute to change the landscape around the air we breathe on a military surface craft. Remarkable. Imagine the impacts when we could start cleaning hotels, high-rises, mechanical rooms. How many buildings do you think we have everywhere that has a condition on the left-hand side that's not being addressed. I can tell you that CO2 has a solution to that. Here we got corrosion. This bottle was some exotic gas that came from, I don't know where it came from, but it was some exotic gas that was at the Puna geothermal plant, and they couldn't use it. Not having this gas would have dropped it, put them back 3 months on their reporting. They had all the people there. They expected this to be there. Because of contaminants, they had to walk away, and they didn't know what to do. There was about 100 of these bottles that were going to do all their samplings. I said, why don't you guys bring by a couple of those bottles, and we see if we can clean it for you. So they brought a couple by. Within 15 seconds, those are the results of the CO2 being able to come and clean the corrosion. Let me tell you that they've cleaned every single bottle. That we weren't there to do that work. We just did it because it was a community action item, help them out. So this is how effective the cleaning is when we utilize technology and innovation and a little bit of common sense. This is a mechanical plate on a broiler. Probably pretty important information on that broiler plate right there if you needed to repair it. That's about 3 minutes worth of cleaning. You can see the effects of the CO2. There's no sand there. There's no grinding. That's just pure carbon dioxide being used to clean. Now you can read that plate. Now they can maybe go and fix that broiler or whatever component it is because they can see it. We have sensitive electrical equipment. You don't really want to get that wet. Being able to come in and use micro dust particles and clean at about 25 psi, we're able to achieve these results fairly quickly. So very effective once we're out there in the field. Terminals, high corrosion. This is the effects of the 150 days of acid rain. So electrical conductivity, resistance, that's the potential for a fire, flashover. You can see on the right, pure copper. Remarkably quick, incredibly effective. We went through and must have did about 100 of these. We were able to get those transformers back online. That's a transformer, by the way, inside of one. Okay, this is one of those great segue points over here in my presentation. You can see Ikialapono. This is actually the farm that we're going to be going to on Friday. So anybody who's participating on our huaka'i, this is Ho'aino o Makaha. And I really like this slide because this is the inspiration behind the work that we're doing. Yeah, the kids, a lot of my ideas came from this farm over here. I want to give them credit that this place is responsible for a lot of these common sense approaches. So I hope that many of you can go to Ho'aino Makaha on Friday and start to feel part of the innovation and what it means to be comfort and safe in our actions and be able to thrive. Yeah, this, I think everything that we want to do here is really captured in this picture. The family's happy, the plants are happy, the soil's there, and we're growing our own food. And we share it with the community. And we're going to be participating a part of that on Friday. So, okay, these are my last couple slides. We couldn't do this effort and this work without the support of my technological partners. I do want to thank Mr. Sidney Higa for doing the presentations today and running the computers. He did a great job. If you guys give him a round of applause, please. Thank you so much. Scott Glenn mentioned to you that Sidney Higa was in that meeting. Sidney actually set up that meeting. He goes, Scott Glenn's going to be at this place. Let's go over there and tackle him and tell him what we're doing. So we did that. It worked out, I guess. So thank you, Sidney. Alika Watts. So the three of us really love this work. We love to be innovative. We love technology. And because of our efforts, and we scrutinize technology, we're willing to put the screws to technology to make sure that Hawaii gets the best. Okay, I want to tell you, we spend years evaluating things before we even make mention of bringing them and then, of course, implementing them. So our platform wouldn't be possible without that level of scrutinization, that willingness to go deeper and farther than anyone else to find the best. Because I can tell you, for this island community, I want the best. I want the best technology. I want the best minds. And I want to be able to share that. We want to be able to share that experience with our community so our community knows that they're getting the best. I think it's very important. So providing power and solutions. Well, we're doing carbon dioxide. We're making dry ice. We're bringing it to port. That's all exciting and well. We're going to be recovering it. Well, that all takes energy. And if we do that, but we're not paying attention to where energy comes from, tell you, Hawaii, very expensive for energy. So what's the cost to that? Can we do it? Is it practical? Does it make sense? Can we afford to go down this road? So if we're not in control of our own energy and our own fuel, how do we do it? Where does the power come from? What happens when the cost of power goes up rapidly? How do we bid? How do we sustain? These are the questions that we ask ourselves, that we challenge ourselves, we push ourselves. And so I'm excited to share that we have an answer to that. And the next presentation is going to give you a highlight and a preview to what is now, what is possible. So in order to recover carbon dioxide emissions from industrial processes, we need to first start with fuel and energy consumptions. We need to look at ourselves. So Scott, when you said that we're taking this effort to decarbonize, to go net zero by 2045, I'm challenged to do this effort by third quarter of 2023 in our own industrial practices. So I want to be able to have sites on the Big Island, on Oahu, where you can come and take a look at legislators, the community. You can come any day. It doesn't have to be a Tuesday or a Saturday. Come on a Wednesday. We'll be making dry ice. We'll be pulling the CO2. We'll be doing it with net zero carbon negative energy. We'll be supporting Hawaiian lifestyle. So that's at the hallmark of it. And the reason why I left this picture over here is because this just shows you new beginnings, new life, a new opportunity. When I see that magma, that glow, I see a new opportunity. I see a brand new take on something. And that's really the inspiration of what we're doing. We're pivoting. We're bringing new life and new energy to things that we knew, or we thought we knew. This is just kind of a scale that really just goes to showcase, wow, there's a lot of things that CO2 impacts. Wow, carbon smart commodities are kind of everywhere. It's a really simple slide, but I think what it does is it really normalizes this experience around carbon dioxide where people feel not normal about it. I don't really understand it. I don't know it, so I'm scared of it, so I'm going to make CO2 really bad. If we don't understand something, we start to challenge it, we start to distance ourselves, we start to create a landscape of indifference. I hope that this slide can bring a little bit of normalcy to carbon dioxide and this experience that you could say, okay, I've seen that before. Oh yeah, that makes sense. Okay, I can leave it up for a couple more seconds so you guys can just digest some of those things and see where you've experienced carbon dioxide in your life. And ultimately at the forefront and the core language of Dibs Hawaii, but ultimately Ho'oulu, I'm going to say that all of our practices and the presentations after this presentation are going to be focused around these three words. Very important, these words. It's burned in my mind. And that's the ability to be agile, agility. That's our responsiveness, adaptability. How quickly can we adapt to the situation? We have our coal plant that's retiring tomorrow, 30 years. Well, tomorrow's the last day, right? What? Huh? September 1. Oh, I'm sorry, the ceremony for it closing is tomorrow. Okay. So we're going to have to adapt pretty quickly, right? So that's on the forefront. And most importantly, is it robust? We're out here isolated in the middle of the Pacific. Is it robust? Does it have the capacity? Is redundancy built in there? So we focus on all these things. All the consortium partners all understand this. This is Iki Alapono. This is shared learning. I want you to walk away from this, that we take on this type of attitude around complex problems. We will make it. We'll get out of this. We'll do it together. So I'm just so excited to be a part of this team, to be a partner of a consortium, to be a native Hawaiian resident, to be in this space because it's the people's place. Thank you. Thank you, Calvin, for the opportunity and really highlighting community and people coming forward to provide solutions. That's really at the hallmark and very inspirational into that. So I wanted to mahalo you for that, to keep championing that. And ultimately, our connection between hemp and dry ice and CO2. And I want you to leave this picture here. It'll be like the final slide in the next conversations. You're going to see a remarkable connection between these two images. I know they seem so different on this slide of like, what are they doing together? And we're going to allow the next conversations to really highlight and showcase on how hemp and CO2 both need each other. Yeah, like salt and pepper. They're both at the table at the same time. Doesn't matter. CO2 needs hemp. Hemp needs CO2. And we're just really excited to be in this journey and to showcase this for the state of Hawaii and the people of Hawaii and ultimately be able to share this with the rest of the world. Thank you.